Are you overwhelmed when you go to the art supply store and you're shopping for pencils to buy for drawing? B, H, HB, F? What do all these pencils even mean and what can it do for you? Hi, my name is David. Thanks for stopping by and watching this video. I'm going to show you what really matters and make it simple for making that decision when you need to buy pencils. I put together a side-by-side comparison of all the different pencils and what they can do for you so that you can see what really matters when it comes to drawing. Let's get started. Okay, so we're going to start with the H, the HB, and the B. And what I'd like to demonstrate for you today is what each pencil does in terms of shading and line work, and what are the differences between each of the numerical values in the range, so that you can get an idea of what each pencil is going to do and what pencil is right for you. So I think to start off, the first thing is to talk about what does H mean, what does HB mean, and what does B mean. You might be familiar with HB as that's actually the standard number 2 pencil. And that means it doesn't have to be a pencil specific to art or fine art. When you went to school or if you're in school, any standard pencil that you buy is a number 2, and those are usually an HB lead. So think of HB as the standard middle of the road everyday pencil. So there is an HB pencil that is a fine art pencil, and I'll get into this a little bit later. There is a difference between buying a pencil designed for drawing and using a standard number 2 pencil. Okay, so what about H and B, and what does H and B even mean? H stands for hardness and B stands for blackness. So the H pencils are a harder lead and the B pencils are a softer lead. So the lead of these pencils is a combination of graphite and clay. So the H pencils have a higher clay content and a lower graphite content, which gives the lead a harder feel, and the line and shading that it produces is lighter because there's a lower graphite content. And then conversely, the B pencils, which stands for blackness, have a higher graphite content and a lower clay content. So it's a softer lead and allows you to create darker marks and shading. Because these 3 pencils are so close to each other in the scale, meaning H, HB, and B are right next to each other, you can see here the difference in the way they lay down a value is very similar. Using this sheet of red mylar or plastic, you can see that they're pretty close in value. Okay, so next I'm going to show you the range of the H pencils. So going from 2H to 3H, 4H, all the way up to 7H. So you can see the differences in the way this pencil lays down shading and what the value looks like when it's laid down. So what I'm doing here on this first pass of filling in these boxes is using a very kind of medium pressure for the shading so that you can see all these pencils given an equal due and what kind of shading you're going to get from each pencil. You're going to start to see that there isn't that much of a difference. It's very, very slight in variation. So the H pencils having a higher clay content makes them very hard, which is what the H stands for. And when you use these pencils to draw lines versus shading like I'm doing here, if you look at the way I marked below each box the name of the pencil, so H, 2H, 3H, I use the actual pencil to write the name of the pencil, and you can see how the hardness really comes through in making those marks. So in other words, that high clay content, essentially at some point you're almost scratching right into the paper surface and going beneath the tooth of the paper. So when you look at the box above to the top right for the B pencil and the way the letter B looks, it's a softer mark as opposed to the 7H on the far right, It's a very skinny line, and you can almost see the indentation into the paper that this pencil creates because of the hard lead. And in general, most H pencils are used for technical drawing. So that is drawing where you don't want a lot of smudging to occur, and you want a very fine, detailed line. So they're not used as much in fine art and drawing, and you're going to see why in a couple minutes. Okay, so that's the first pass. The second pass, what I'm doing is putting the max amount of pressure that I can onto the pencil so I know that I'm creating the darkest amount of shading that pencil can produce. And that simply happens by, if you notice my index finger position, it's very close to the end of the pencil, closer to the lead. And that's how you put the most pressure onto the pencil. So really putting the max pressure on here, I'm getting the most mileage out of how dark these H pencils can go. And you're starting to see here, there's not a whole lot of difference in the value. It's very subtle and it's very minute. So looking through this red sheet of plastic, and the reason I do this is, in general, you use this against colors to see value. So it's the same idea as squinting without having to squint. Next up for this example are the B pencils. So the same idea, going from the 2B, 3B, all the way up to 7B. And we'll do the same technique where the first pass is a medium pressure and the second pass is the max pressure. So you may start to notice already in this first pass how much easier the pencil goes down onto the paper. And that again is because this has a lower clay content and a higher graphite content. And it allows the graphite to sit on top of the paper and not embed as far down into the paper. So it makes erasing the B pencils much easier than the H pencils, because on the H pencils, the clay is driving that graphite down into the paper. It makes it difficult to erase out. Okay, here for the second pass now, I'm putting the max amount of pressure onto the pencil to get the darkest value that I can. And again, just note, I'm putting my finger very close to the lead on the pencil, and that's how you get that max pressure. And you can really tell when you're putting that pressure on, because you can almost feel like the lead getting close to breaking if you were to put any more pressure on it. So now you're starting to see a little bit more of a difference in the value ranges from the B to the 7B. And then obviously here, from the H's to the B's, there's quite a difference in value. Okay, so next I wanted to show what these two lines of pencils that we just looked at, the H's and the B's, look like right next to each other. So here we're putting them right next to each other, going from 7H, which is the lightest, all the way to 7B, which is the darkest. You can see side by side how those value differences really look. So you can see on the 5H pencil here how even when it's turned on its side and you're creating this shading with a delicate touch to it, it really puts a hard mark onto the paper. So you can see some of the pencil lines coming through as opposed to using something in the B range. This is something important to keep in mind as you're deciding what pencil to use, is how you ultimately want your marks and shading to look. So if you're looking for more of a line in the shading, that's something to consider. So again, the B pencils, you can see how much easier the graphite is going down onto the paper with little effort. And this is just at a medium pressure. So now this side-by-side scale really makes it easier to see what the differences are in value and which pencils you might want to go with in deciding what to pick up. So here, adding the red plastic, again, you can really see that difference pretty clearly. Okay, so the other important part about choosing a pencil is, apart from the shading, is the line work that the pencil is going to do for you and what kind of mark it makes. So I took 4 pencils here, 2 H's and 2 B's, and you can see very clearly now the type of mark that the H pencil makes. So these first two, it's a very thin line, and that first one definitely is scratching a little bit into the surface of the paper. As opposed to now picking up the B pencil, it's a darker, blacker line. Remember, B stands for blackness. And the shading goes down very easily, a nice thick very beautiful line that this creates. And then using the 5B here, it's a very effortless use of the pencil to get these kind of beautiful darker lines. And you can really see the difference here in the value range. So far left, H pencil, very faint. And then on the right, the 5B, much darker line. So again, 5H, H, B, and 5B. So this next exercise is what I thought would be really helpful to see as well, is not only stacking each pencil against one another, but looking at the ranges within each pencil and applying different pressure to the pencil. So in other words, can I get the same value range that I get from a 7H to a 7B by just using a B pencil, for example? Think of this as worst case scenario. I can only buy one pencil. Could I get that same range with one pencil by just applying a lightness, a touch, and a heavier hand to it? And the answer to that is, yeah, you basically can, but you have to consider what the final drawing is going to look like and if you're happy aesthetically with how that looks. So what I mean by that is, if you look at the far left column where I didn't put any shading down, and it's just a blank box, that's representing the paper. So in most sketching and drawing you do, you're going to leave the paper as the whitest white. So that's why I'm including it in this scale. So the 3 boxes to the right are pretty much the range you would lay down. So a next step above the paper would be your lightest range, which is the second column. And the next column would be your middle range, and the far right is the darkest dark that this pencil can give you. So what I mean by the result you want to get aesthetically with your finished drawing is something to consider, is when you look at the row of the 5H, you can see that that's a very faint difference in value. So when you got the paper to the far right dark value, yes, there is a range in value, but it's very subtle, as opposed to the 5B at the bottom where it's a very drastic range in value. There's much more contrast, and it's going to give you a very different look of the drawing. So you can see here why most drawing and sketching techniques would use pencils more in the B range and just a few from the H range, because of that difference in value it gives you much more easily. And the 5H and those H pencils are more in the technical drawing realm. So you could still create a drawing with those, but it's going to just have a less drastic range in value. You could see it being used for something in what's called the high key drawing, which means there's a high amount of light. And that's a little bit too technical. I don't want to get into what that is, but think of that like an overcast, foggy day where there's not a lot of difference in the value, but everything has a brightness and lightness to it. You could see the 5H pencil producing that, as opposed to the 5B, which that sort of scene would not have those dark darks. Okay, so next up, I thought it'd be fun to show you what the standard number 2 HP pencil can do. And apparently this is America's pencil. I didn't know America had a pencil. So you're going to see here, I'm going to do the same exercise, but using the standard pencil. And I think you're going to be surprised by what we see here. So you can see the shading goes down very easily, but I think there's something to note right off the bat when you look at the boxes right below that first value. The next box goes down very easily. It's easy to get that mid-grade middle value. And then the last box, I was actually very surprised by how nice it lays down a pretty dark value in a very consistent shading and gradation. But I think the thing to note here is this first light value compared to the HB right below it, there's just kind of a roughness in the way it lays down that shading. It looks very kind of broken up and chalky almost, as opposed to right below that using the art pencil grade of HB, which gives a very nice even gradation of shading. And that's on the light value. On the far right, on the darker value, it actually is pretty comparable in my opinion. So just kind of an interesting little learning here about the standard everyday pencil. So worst comes to worst, if you're really on a shoestring budget, you could use a standard American pencil to start drawing. So where does that leave us, and what is really the aim of this video, and what am I recommending here? So I think the important thing to take away is you just want to pick about 3 or 4 pencils that cover the ends of the spectrum in this range that I showed you here. So meaning you want to pick one from the middle of the H range. So here I just picked the 5H, so but really a 3, a 4, or 5H would be fine. Something right in the middle road, the HB, is what I decided to go with here. And then on the upper end of the spectrum here, the 5B. So keep in mind your lightest color will be the paper itself, and then using a 3 or 4 or 5H with a low or middle amount of pressure is going to give you that second value range. Something in the middle of the scale, so a HB, a B, or an H is going to give you the middle range. And then something on the higher end, like a 3, 4, or 5B, or even higher, is going to give you that darkest value. So which one of those that you pick, so is it a 5, 3, or 4H? It doesn't really matter. It's pretty negligible. So if you rewind this video, you're going to see those differences in value are not that much. So it's just really more about picking out 3 or 4 and having that finesse and that touch with the pressure that's going to give you those differences in value. And then apart from shading, the other thing to think about is how you're using the pencils in the stages of the drawing process. So when you're laying your initial key lines, and key lines are essentially just guidelines that help you to establish the overall drawing on the page, you're going to want to use a pencil from the H range, so like a 2 or a 3H, with a light touch, because those are going to be easy to erase and they're very light lines. So remember, you don't want to press too hard with the H pencil, as it's going to scratch into the paper and make it really difficult to erase. So using those for the key lines, and then something like an HB for your first general pass of the sketch is a good pencil to pick up. And then you build from there as you're adding the value. So I hope you found that video helpful, and I hope it cleared up some confusion about what you really need to buy when you go to the art store and you pick up supplies for drawing. To make it even easier, I have a downloadable shopping list of art supplies and drawing supplies that you need to get started in the link below this video. All right, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.